So last but not least, I'd like to introduce Andrew Simpson and Claire Turner, who are going to speak on repository implementing and integrating a Figshare-powered institutional repository at RCSI. So Andrew Simpson is Associate Librarian for Education, Research and Clinical Support at RCSI, where he oversees RCSI Libraries' support to staff and students in information literacy. Claire Turner is Commercial Director from Figshare, and she started in open access publishing, has a master's from UCL in publishing, and joined Figshare to work with repositories and libraries 2 years ago. Okay.
Cool. We didn't have any training on the clicker, so I'm hoping this is going to go okay. So my name's Claire Turner, and I joined Figshare a couple of years ago. I'm going to be as quick as I can to give Andrew the chance to talk to you about what Figshare and Symplectic Elements have been doing with RCSI. So, as I said, I'm going to do a brief introduction to Figshare, and then we're going to talk about the sort of joined-up approach between using repositories and CRISs to give a platform for a wide variety of outputs. So, obviously, repositories have been part of library infrastructure for a very long time. The needs of what those repositories do has been evolving. We've heard a lot about research data management here and in the last few years at library conferences. And what Figshare really specializes in is data-proficient institutional repository infrastructure. So we do cover papers and thesis, but we do also cover data, non-traditional research outputs, and all sorts of good materials. So why a Figshare repository and repositories generally, and where they're going? Figshare.com, started by Mark Conul 10 years ago. It is our 10th anniversary this year, so if you haven't seen it yet, there'll be some stuff happening on social media, and we would have had goodies to give away today, but they got stuck in customs. So next time, if you're around, we'll be there with stuff this time. So there's a lot of citations happening now for outputs that are beyond traditional journal publications. I come from journal publishing, actually worked at Frontiers on the previous set of slides, so I'm very familiar with how important citations are for publications. What we need to sort of move towards is future-proofing infrastructure within libraries, so that as more outputs are becoming citable, assigning DOIs and PIDs, that your infrastructure can really help to support the growing needs of faculties and the variety of outputs that are being considered to be citable items. We do a State of Open Data report with Springer Nature every year, where we analyse funders, publishers, researchers, librarians' attitudes to data and sharing data and open data. So this year's report, if you haven't seen it, came out earlier this year, and the survey for next year's one is coming out earlier this year, so please do feel free to fill that out if you see it around. And 76% of researchers really feel like sharing their data in a public repository is more important to them now than it ever has been. As a librarian, what Figshare does is give you guys the ability to help researchers with metadata, making things fair, making things really shareable in a useful way. So we do the boring part of making software work to give you guys a chance to actually put your skills to use and help people make things more discoverable, and in turn making sure that stuff is compliant with funder mandates. So for those of you that know us as maybe a data repository specialist, we're also moving into a full institutional repository landscape. So we're obviously cloud-based, fully supported, fully hosted on the cloud. You can have a branded portal, set your own custom metadata. Papers are visualized and previewed. So the question, I won't give the answer away, but that's a question for the quiz happening here, is how many things can we preview and visualize in the browser? And how many file formats can we take? It's a lot. We've got the ability to migrate things from your existing IR, which is, I think, some of the themes that we talked about after this. And we follow the mandate that it should be as open as possible, but as closed as necessary for sharing outputs now. So we were fully open data, fully open research when we first started, and we heard the feedback from the community that we need to be able to specialize access to content, and it needs to be suiting researchers' needs. So there's a lot been happening on the product side for that in the past few years. And of course, for you guys, the admin panel too. So we have two customers really at Figshare. We have the researchers and we have the librarians. So we really think about those two groups when we develop the product and move things forward. And that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Andrew.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm going to talk more generally about RCSI and our change of repository. So Basically, looking back to 2018, we had a digital commons repository, the bpress1, there as a standalone repository. We'd had a repository since at least 2012, and it was working fine. We had enthusiastic users who would put all of their stuff on there, and we had plenty of users who knew nothing about it. The main negative about it was just that it was a separate repository that you needed to add stuff to, either whether it's the researcher or the library, as a standalone thing. Research is obviously really important to RCSI. We're a small healthcare institution, but we publish some high impact research, so it's kind of central to how the organisation sees itself. And an opportunity really arose around 2017-18 with them reviewing the research system, the CRIS system that they were using. It was kind of similar to repository in that it was standalone and separate and limited, and they undertook a full tender to look for a system that would do a lot more. And really integration of systems became the key key message. So you can see this was the planning diagram used at the time with we used RIMS as the acronym, Research Information Management System, rather than CRIS, but the same thing, with kind of twin requirements for profile management and awards management. Connecting from HR and finance systems, feeding into it, feeding out to the website profiles for researchers on the website. Also feeding in feeds from Crossref and ORCID and Scopus and so on, so that publications would be easily updated. And in the bottom left there, you can see the repository, which was digital commons at the time. So it became a really key requirement for the repository to be part of this new plan, part of this new ecosystem. And we were well involved in the project for the CRIS system as well, able to take part in the tender and in the implementation group. So Symplectic Elements was the result of that, came out as the system they chose for the publications side of the CRIS system. They actually chose Fidatum for the awards management and have them talking to each other. And we were then tasked with looking at our repository system. Once we'd established that the existing repository didn't have an API, wouldn't be able to integrate in, we undertook our own tender, mainly looking for something that would do that integration, but also all the nice stuff around easy usability and nice presentation. So obviously that was a very long and involved and complicated process from implementation. Spoiler alert, we chose Figshare, you may have guessed already. So rather than go through the whole process of how we implemented, I'm just picking out a few of the kind of key issues that we spent an awful lot of time on over the implementation. So in a way, the biggest decision was around the structure of the repository. So Figshare bases it all on a group structure, and the group kind of dictates the public gateways that you see, but it also dictates the metadata fields that are available. And that took some thinking through. We ended up with a kind of hybrid approach of having some groups that were based on the item type, so that we could have a books gateway, for instance, and a theses gateway, and some based on department, because we had a very strong kind of departmental structure in the old repository. And to make that work, we needed some development work from Figshare in the bottom right there. They had to work on surfacing items so that you could have items appearing in several groups in different gateways and so on, which was a key requirement for us. And the biggest legacy job there, I've got the migration itself from Digital Commons was very smooth and relatively straightforward, but it didn't do the whole thing. It kind of put them in as a bucket of articles that were in the new repository, but in order for them to connect into that wider ecosystem, we had to manually edit the authors in the old records to make sure it wasn't just John Smith, it was the John Smith that's in the Symplectic record as well, and so on. So that took a bit of work as well. In terms of meeting the requirements, I've not mentioned as one of the big jobs the integration with Symplectic, because that was, again, not too difficult. The main issues were just kind of separating out. Obviously, there is a difference between the publications you want listed in a CRIS from the publications you want to appear in a repository. You don't want stuff from people's previous employment. You want to retain stuff from people who've left, and as well as theses and so on. But once we'd worked through the integration works really well, there was an upgrade to Symplectic earlier this year that's made it even better in terms of the feed of Figshare information into Elements and matching with records coming in from Scopus and that sort of side of it. So we're really satisfied with it. The picture here is just a screenshot of somebody editing one of their records within Elements, and you can see there's a little blue button. You can just about see which is the button you press to deposit to the repository from the CRIS system, from Elements. And basically that just opens then a new window, and literally all they have to do is just upload the file and press deposit, and hopefully the metadata is there and rich and good coming from Crossref or Scopus or wherever. So that's been really successful. It's worked really well. There are two routes through to deposit directly to Figshare, which is what we'd use for theses and for some of the other ones. So I'll hurry up. Other key requirements, depositing and administration. From a library staff point of view, I would say it's slightly convoluted and complicated, partly because we made lots of decisions about rich metadata that we've chosen to do. It has given us some more work in terms of validation. And I think some of the processes around Figshare, as we've said, it came from being a data repository. It's adapting itself to deal with publications, and validation wasn't a key part of their earlier products, and it's kind of some of the processes we've had to kind of adapt a little bit, but it's being developed all the time, and I would say that Figshare staff have been great with us and always ready to be on a call and talk through options for how things can be done or whether things can be developed. Publishing and presenting wise, it does have a really attractive front end with all the little preview screens, so we're very happy with that. Browsing and searching, slightly more difficult, but it does come up really high in Google results and that sort of thing, which you'd want from a repository. So overall, we're really happy with the integration and the opportunities that the integration with the CRIS system presents. We now work closely with the staff within college who look after that system. We have a monthly meeting and kind of can make sure metadata is kept in line. I think longer term, it still feels like we're only halfway in some respects, but metadata quality for the researchers across systems should improve over time, and is improving, I think. And it also helps in engaging with researchers if you can go to them and talk about improving their ORCID profiles, their Scopus profiles, their website kind of information, and the repository. They're all interconnected, so you don't have to see them about that and then go back and say, oh, actually, can you also give us the repository PDFs so that we can do it? It's kind of all part of the same conversation. Just to finish, the numbers are there. I think I gave the numbers earlier. We're definitely getting more downloads, and because of the preview panels, there's now 151. That's for the calendar year 2021 views on average for each item. I think we used to be at 70 downloads per item, so the 151 views probably includes the downloads, but a few other people just look at it in the window. And I thought I'd finish with a general point. I'm sure this audience is all convinced by repositories and so on, but some researchers take more persuasion. So we did a bit of work at the end of last year just looking at Scopus stats and using the unpaywall categories of open access on Scopus and separating out the green OA that isn't available also as gold or as another sort of open access, and looking at the citations. So that was the results we found for RCSI content over a 3-year period. The average citations for the stuff that was only available on a repository, not necessarily our repository, but a green open access, we were seeing 15.5 citations as opposed to 6 for those which were not open access at all. So, it's hopefully an argument to use with researchers to just emphasize that it's for their own good as well. They are more visible, they can get benefits from depositing. And a thank you just to the wider repository team. Gráinne McCabe in particular has done loads of work on it. Colm, as you mentioned, used to be very involved in this project as well at its beginning. And Nicola Smith and Christina Doherty have done loads of work on the processes and the depositing and sorting out of all the stages of it. So thanks to them. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much to Andrew and to Claire as well. So I think we've got